I want to talk a little more actually on a couple of things. Follow up a little more on your survivors of socialism initiative because it's just fantastic. But in the more immediate one is that recent release you put out showing the amount of municipal employees who get parking passes. I thought they were all green and they're supposed to ride bikes and take the train.
Well, that's a good point. We saw a lot of cities across Canada declaring climate emergencies and urging the phase out of fossil fuels in different ways. In Ontario, a number of cities indicated that they want no more natural gas powered electricity. In Manitoba, the city council there, in Winnipeg, they passed a motion looking into how they can phase out natural gas in the city. And of course, Winnipeg is one of the coldest major cities on the planet. So a lot of people there use natural gas to heat their homes. A lot of businesses use it and so forth. So we saw these different motions happening across Canada. And we thought, well, wait a second, let's take a look into how many of these cities are giving their staff and council members free parking passes. Because of course, these cities are trying to get everyone else to stop using oil and gas products. What about council? Are they making it easy for councillors to keep driving? If you're giving someone a free parking pass, you're certainly making it easy to do so. And so we filed freedom of information requests with, I think it was around 20 different cities or so in pretty much from Ontario west. And we got some pretty interesting responses.
Yeah. So, you would think in Calgary, this was a crisis. This is an emergency, as you said. Are our systems not adequate then for civil employees?
Well, I think what we saw is council declared a climate emergency for you and I and your listeners, but not for the city itself. Calgary's giving out over 1,000 free parking passes to various staff, including council members. And council members not only have access to free parking at the city's parkade at City Hall, they also get a special pass which allows them to park at any metered parking spot in the city. And one former city employee indicated that they can also park in loading zones. So it's kind of interesting that the City Hall makes it really, really easy for councillors to park anywhere for free, but yet the rest of us are supposed to be, riding bicycles and walking and taking transit and that. And so, we're flagging this as an option for councils. We assume that they were just too busy figuring out how everyone else could reduce their carbon footprint, that maybe they forgot about their own. And so we flagged this in, like I say, in many provinces and cities across the country.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you, pointing it out. This is above and beyond, like some businesses provide parking for staff, some don't. Would that be considered a taxable benefit though for city staff?
It is a taxable benefit, yes. But yeah, certainly you're going to pay less than in your taxes on that benefit than if you had to straight up pay for the pass. And, one thing we noted when we put this out was that we don't begrudge cities giving free parking to their council members, even, more senior staff. It's a common perk in the private sector. I think the problem is when cities are declaring climate emergencies and telling everyone that, hey, we got to stop using CO2 and it's an emergency. Well, then why are you still encouraging council members to drive to work? And so if council members had to do like the rest of society and pay for parking, then you might see some behavioral changes at the top.
Well, yeah. And again, they have access to transit. You think they'd be able to lead by example? We'll give a free transit pass then. And fair enough. That's a benefit and it's falling within the green ideals. And you can ride the line. But I got a feeling a lot of them don't actually want to ride city transit.
Well, I don't have data on how many of them use transit and how often they do. I know they do actually get a free transit pass. So they get the free transit pass, they get the free park, basically a free park anywhere pass, and then a free pass the city's parkade. So they get all kinds of options there. And, to go back to this point, if you're going to say that there's a climate emergency, then there's, I think, only really two options for you to consider. And that would be transit or, you walk or ride your bicycle. But, it wasn't just Calgary that was doing this. We flagged or identified over 5,400 free parking passes that cities have been handing out. Toronto was another big one. They also gave out over 1,000 free parking passes there. Victoria BC, oddly enough. I mean, they're one of the most aggressive when it comes to green policies. They like to think of themselves as a green city and a green province and so forth. They actually were arguably one of the worst offenders. They gave out 179 free passes, which isn't that high, but they gave out 97 free passes for local politicians. And there's not 97 politicians on Victoria's City Council. There'd be a relatively small number, but they were giving them out to all kinds of other municipalities in the Victoria region. All those municipalities were getting free parking passes to come and park in Victoria. So it was pretty bizarre. They even gave federal MPs free parking passes. Elizabeth May got one. And so, yeah, there were a couple other jurisdictions where they would do that. They would give it out to other levels of government, but nothing like Victoria, where it was seemingly they were giving out these free parking passes to politicians in every direction as far as the eye could see. It was pretty strange.
Nice work if you can get it, I guess.
Yeah.
Getting on, I guess I'll segue, with the old do as I say, not as I do. And that's a common thread in socialist regimes and places like that, where some bureaucrats could live in very large places and drive very nice cars, while the commoners are typically in row housing and using transit. Your Survivors of Socialism series, how's that been coming along?
It's been coming along pretty well, thanks. We actually, the Canada Strong and Free Network had their annual conference at the beginning of May. And I had the honor of speaking with Yunmi Park. She is a pretty well-known young lady who escaped from North Korea at the age of 13. And she didn't just quietly become part of the Western world. She's been a vocal advocate for her people, drawing attention to the atrocities that have occurred in North Korea. And so I had the opportunity to interview her on stage, ask her questions and it was a real honor. And we've got that video posted on our Survivors of Socialism page if anyone wants to watch it. But it's pretty incredible. We're still looking for more stories. We're trying to talk to people from different countries to get this information out there so people can hear those perspectives. And one of the big research components of that project was that we were asking people from socialist and communist countries, Canadians who came from those countries, what policies, if any, concern you about what you're seeing in Canada today? Because they remind you of the countries that you fled. And the number one concern that we heard about was actions by governments to try and restrict freedom of speech. And many people noted two of the federal pieces of legislation that we're looking at doing that. So it's pretty interesting that people that have come from these countries where they've had very little in the way of human rights, where people often get killed because they're a political opponent, and people who speak out and protest get thrown in jail. It was interesting to hear that people that came from those countries are concerned about just restrictions on freedom of speech in Canada. I don't think anyone would say that we're close to a Venezuela or a communist China or something like that. But it is concerning that we're seeing these movements on restricting freedom of speech.
Yeah, well, it's worth knowing, that we might be moving in that direction. And I mean, most of the Canadians, we are living under some great freedoms, and it's not so bad. And I think that's some of the risk that comes. A lot of young people don't really understand. I mean, socialism, communism hold a fantastic appeal when you look at just the basics on the theory and so on in a simple way. But you're very hard pressed to find anybody who's actually lived through it who says, yeah, that was a really good idea, and I think we should go back to it.
Yeah, and that's a key problem, because we see this all the time in Canada, where you have university professors or politicians or activists talking about, yay, we got to embrace socialism. And it's like, okay, well, have you tried living under that regime? And inevitably the answer is no, because when you talk to people that have lived under those structures, whether it's Venezuela, China, not so much China today, but China in the past, where there was more of a collective state-controlled economy. Now it's much more entrepreneurial. They still have that overarching lack of freedoms and democratic rights in China, but it's a good example from the past of sort of that collective approach to government. You look at the former Soviet Union, other places in Central America and so forth, and the results are not good. And they're pretty clear that structure does not work well for citizens. Inevitably, you see poverty and human suffering. And Venezuela is a great example right now. The United Nations has noted that believe it's over 6 million people from Venezuela have fled the country simply because of significant poverty. The average person has lost something like 20 pounds because there's not enough food. And that's a country that's blessed with great natural resources. There's lots of oil there, nice beaches, and so forth, but can't make a go of it because of the government structure is socialist in nature, and inevitably it's led to a lot of human misery.
Yeah, well, and I mean, there's a lot of. I think you don't see it as much as you used to, and I think it's because people got called out on social media by people who'd been there, and that's with Cuba. I mean, a lot of people. I remember 20 years ago, especially in Canada, and professors and others, and they would point to saying, "Look at this example of a beautiful workman's paradise. It's fantastic down there. They got great health care and all this." Until you could start hearing the voices of the Cubans who escaped there, the ones who got here, and they get upset, and I don't blame them. They say, "Guys, I had to get on a rickety raft and cross the ocean to Florida to get away from that hell. You're quit portraying this country that put my family through that misery as some sort of paradise. It's anything but." And you don't hear that as much anymore. I think open communication from people who escaped those countries is part of what brought that down.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And that's always the great test, is there are people trying to get into those countries. And like you say, with Cuba, if it's such a paradise, why, and I'll put paradise in air quotes, why is it that Cubans have been creating these little rafts and climbing onto tiny fishing vessels and doing everything they can to escape the country? In Cuba, there's even been cases where people have climbed into the wheel wells of airplanes where the landing gear is. They run onto the airfield and they climb up into these airplanes. And if you think about it, these airplanes get really, really high up into the atmosphere. There's a lack of oxygen. They can die from not getting enough air. They can die because it's extremely cold. They can die when the plane starts to come down and the landing gear opens up at a very high height, and people can fall out and die. So, I mean, you've got people risking their lives to get out of Cuba. We know what happened during after World War II, when Germany was split between East and West Germany. It was people on the eastern side, the communist side, that were trying to escape to the west. You look at North Korea, like I said, Yeonmi Park, she escaped from North Korea to try and get away from that country. So time and time again, you look at whether or not people are trying to get into these socialist paradises, and the answer is no. And one thing I would just add, is we talk about this on our site and in some of the videos that we have, is that people often say, well, Scandinavia is a socialist part of the world, and they're doing extremely well. That this is the claim, and the fact is that Scandinavian countries are not socialist countries. They are market-based economies that use the wealth created from those markets to pay for generous social welfare programs. So it's fundamentally a market-based economy, not a socialist economy. And if people want to advocate for the Scandinavian model, by all means, go for it, but just don't call it a socialist economy, because that's not accurate.
Yeah, well, and again, I mean, we can't pretend, we shouldn't be able to pretend that we don't know any better, and that's where it's great to see it documented. It's fine if you were raised here and you talk to students and you grew up and you're young, but I mean, now you're growing, you can listen to some of the people who actually lived through it. And I appreciate you guys getting that up there so people can hear those voices directly. It's not your opinion as a website or an advocate or an author. It's just straight up, conversations from people who actually had to experience it, and people can take from it what they will.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it, I think, is that people can hear directly from individuals who lived in those regimes. So whether it's Cuba or someone who escaped from Venezuela, like I said, North Korea, we talked to someone from Latvia, Romania, China, and so forth. We're looking to talk to more people. So if anyone's watching and they've come from a socialist or communist country, we'd be interested in hearing your experience.
Great. Well, and before I wrap up then, so they can find you at secondstreet.org, I believe it is. And have you got other initiatives you want to let us know about before you go? Or
that's a good question. We got lots of stuff in the works. We've got our policy brief coming out on healthcare in the near future, with an idea that we think can help patients and governments with long waiting lists. So that one's coming up. We've got some research coming up on housing, and lots of other fun little projects that are underway.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to talking to you when those come out as well. And I guess, keep up the good work out there. And thanks for coming on the show today, Colin.
Okay. Thanks, Cory. Appreciate it.